So often we'll hear discussions of the present moment, focusing on the present moment. What is the present moment? Today's discussion will be largely philosophy, but at the very end we'll talk a little bit about some practical kinds of things we can consider. Coming up. So I'm Doug Smith. I'm study director at the Secular Buddhist Association, that's secularbuddhism.org. And if you're interested in helping to promote a wiser and a kinder and a less stress-filled world, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll have talks like these out once or twice a week on Mondays and most Thursdays. So if you're interested, sign up and you won't miss them. So often nowadays in Buddhism and other kinds of circles, we'll hear talk about a focus on the present moment. And I think it's a very important focus, but I'm going to leave aside that for the moment and just talk about the philosophy. What do we mean by the present moment? It seems like the present moment is all that there is, as though the past and the future don't really exist. In a sense, they're just stories we tell ourselves in the present. So the past is a kind of a present story we tell ourselves based on present evidence we can find around us in books and in archaeological discoveries, and in our own memories, but those memories, of course, are accessed in the present. Similarly, the future is a kind of a story we tell ourselves based on evidence we find in the present. So we extrapolate from those stories. And although it seems like we're inhabiting the past when we're in those stories and inhabiting the future when we're involved in worries and concerns about the future, in fact, at all times we're only in the present. And this goes for even the immediate past or the immediate future. It's not as though the past ceases to be real in a sort of a gradual, stepwise kind of continuous process as it gets older and older, so that the past that's an hour ago is a little bit less real than the past a half an hour ago, and so on. It's really like the present is an instant. It's like a crossing of two lines, a point that occurs at the intersection of two lines, or let's say a line in a plane, or a plane in a solid. And we think of the present as being a sort of a dimensionless in the direction of motion, a kind of a plane of present that sort of continues up through a solid which is all of time. That's the kind of picture I think many of us have in mind of the present moment continuing through time. So it's a kind of again, extensionless in the direction of motion, a kind of a plane that includes everything that is simultaneous to it at that time. So that is the sort of present moment that we consider so important, I think, in our thought and practice. But there are a couple of philosophical issues with this present moment, which I'll try to unpack here. The first is that the present moment as experienced involves change, constant change. So the present moment isn't something fixed, it is not experienced as something fixed, but it's experienced as something that's constantly changing and changing, unfolding in the present. But I think if we consider it, we'll realize that change always involves some passage of time, even if it's a very short passage of time. So for example, velocity is a change in distance over time. Acceleration is a change in velocity over time. And any kind of a change involves some kind of distinction, a difference between what was before and what is now, or between what is now and what will be in the near future. So if what we're experiencing in the present moment is change, in fact what we're experiencing is a very short passage of time. Or at least let's say a passage of time, but probably one that is very short. So this is the first issue with our experience of the present moment. Our experience of the present moment isn't of a single moment, but is actually of a short passage of time. Some of that time, of course, is in the past, right? So it's stuff that isn't here anymore. It's stuff that isn't real anymore. In a sense, it's already past. The second problem is that the experiences that we have are always of the near past. So for example, if I snap my fingers, that noise, that sound, takes time to propagate from my fingers through the air as a waveform in the air to my ear, to my inner ear, and to your inner ear, where it interacts with the inner ear, the little hairs in the inner ear, and that in turn causes certain kinds of neural firings in the inner ear that then propagate into the auditory cortex and are interpreted as sound. And all of this is a process that takes time. It can take perhaps 1/10 of a second or more. And while I've just been discussing hearing, the same thing is true of sight, where we have light waves that interact with the eye, with the retina, then the visual cortex, and is interpreted as sight. And in fact, all of our senses of the world, which is the only way we know about the world, involve time. They take time for the information from the external world to propagate into the body and then into the mind, into the brain. So in fact, what we are always experiencing is the past. Now, it may be the immediate past, a past that's perhaps 1/10 of a second old, but as we've just said, the idea of a present moment is really the idea of an extensionless kind of moment. And what's in the past, whether it's 1/10 of a second or a second or a year, is just as unreal. It's just a kind of a construct for us as anything even farther in the past would be. So if we think of the present as the only real thing that we inhabit, we realize that that present is something of a construct out of things that are already past, that are already gone. That all that we are experiencing around us is stuff that is already, in a sense, gone. It may be gone only by 1/10 of a second, but nevertheless, it is something that is gone. So the oddity, or one of the oddities here, is that if there is only really a present, it's a present that we're never really in. It's a present that we're in only insofar as we're aware of what has just passed beyond the threshold of our awareness, or just beyond the threshold of our ability to experience. So if there's only really a present, then the weird thing is we're never really inhabiting that present. Instead, we're inhabiting a world that is perhaps 1/10 of a second old. Now, onto a related topic here. What I said before at the beginning here, was that the present can be thought of as a kind of a set of all the things that are simultaneous to me right now, or simultaneous to you right now while you're watching the video. You can think of it kind of, if all the world is three-dimensional, you can think of it as a sort of a plane that's continuing up. With a plane is a plane of all things that are simultaneous. The odd thing here comes up when we consider a really crucial discovery of Albert Einstein's in his general theory of relativity. And this is quite a bit too complicated for me to get into in a short video, particularly because I'm not really a specialist in it, of course, but there are other videos about this if it interests you. The issue has to do with what's called the relativity of simultaneity. That is to say, the fact that two things are simultaneous is not an objective feature of the universe. Instead, the fact that two things are simultaneous is relative to your relative motions and your relative accelerations. So for example, you may be simultaneous to me. What you're thinking right now may be simultaneous to what I'm thinking right now. And nevertheless, there may be other things that you're simultaneous with that are in my past or that are in my future. What we see as simultaneous might be quite different at the same time. In other words, our experiences of what exactly constitutes that line through reality may be different. Your past, something that's past for you may be future for me, and vice versa. And this weird structure of the universe is what led Albert Einstein to believe essentially that it was the present that was the illusion. The present moment is the illusion. The real reality is a kind of, that the universe is a kind of four-dimensional space-time, where past and future, well, they aren't actually past and future, they're simply moments in time, or in space-time, are just as real, whether or not they occur in our past or in our future. If some of you have ever heard of the early Buddhist school, the Sarvastivadins, this is a view that is at least very, very faintly reminiscent of their view about the reality of the past and the future, although I wouldn't want to make too much of it. So that may be sort of mind-blowing. The general point I hope to have made in this video is that what we inhabit is what some of the philosophers call the specious present, where specious means that it appears a certain way but isn't really. So for example, a specious argument is an argument that sounds like a good argument at first glance or at first listen, but when you think about it really isn't that good. The specious present is something that seems like a present moment. It really seems like moment in time, it seems completely real. But if you consider it from the point of view of the structure of that moment and the way it seems to change over that short period of time, and the way that in fact all the information we have is slightly old and all these other things, we begin to realize that in fact this present moment that we inhabit is a specious present. So I mean, that's a lot of philosophy there, but I want to try to get some kind of a practical result out of it. When we think of the past and the future, we think of them as places that we inhabit. They are things that we cling to in our stories. We look back with pride or with dismay on things that have happened in our past. We're sorry about things that we did in our past. And the same having to do with the future. We worry about the future. We cling to a good future for ourselves if things are not so good right now. Or we are aversive to what we see as a bad future. And in that way, we sort of seem to inhabit these places, even though, in a sense, they aren't real. And a lot of, I think, the very wise teachings of contemporary meditation teachers is to see them that way, to see past and future as stories that we don't necessarily have to cling to, because they are, in fact, stories that are occurring right now and that may not have anything really to do with the actual past or the actual future. And what I hope these thoughts I've outlined today can help is now to turn to that present moment and to have the same attitude towards that present moment. The problem is that if we back away from the past and back away from the future as stories, that may lead us to instead cling to that present moment, to cling to it all the stronger as the only moment we really have. That itself can create a kind of a stress, a kind of a problem that we don't need to have. The present moment is just as weird, just as strange, just as much a kind of a story as the past and the future. And I don't mean to imply in any of this that there isn't a real past or isn't a real present or isn't a real future. Of course, our experience of the present is very real. But I think our wisest way of approaching the present is to see it as a kind of a story, a kind of a specious present, and that the wisest way to approach that is through an attitude of non-clinging and non-identification, not seeing ourselves as wholly in the present, but the present is a kind of a construct, a kind of a flowing construct that occurs out of the change between the immediate past and the immediate future, if you like. So I hope that's been useful for you. If you're new to the channel, welcome. Thanks so much to all of you for your comments and questions. If you have any comments about the present, how you see the specious present, I'd be interested to hear, because I know this is a very complicated issue and something that kind of seems mind-blowing to a lot of people. So anyway, I would be interested in anything you guys have to add. Thanks so much for your questions and comments, and we're going to catch you on the next one, whatever happens in the future, right? Bye-bye.